The bloodied girl in the dust sky was filled with smoke and fire. As broken machines lay scattered across the battlefield, the ground shook with distant explosions, and the cries of the wounded echoed through the metal ruins, but none of it mattered. To Jacob, the human medic who stood frozen beside a cracked wall, his gaze fixed on the small figure slumped in the dirt ahead of him. She was not human. Her skin was pale silver, with violet streaks across her arms. Her clothes were torn and soaked in blood, and one of her legs was twisted in a way that made Jacob wince. But it was not the injuries that held him still. It was her eyes, wide, filled with fear and pain. And something else, something like hope. She reached out weakly, one hand trembling, as her voice cracked through the dust. "Please help me." Her words were barely a whisper, but they struck Jacob like a thunderclap around them. Human soldiers moved past, ignoring her or stepping over her. Some even spat in her direction. She was an enemy, a Velaria species known for their advanced tech and Cold War strategies. And the orders were clear: leave the enemy to die. But Jacob did not move. He looked down at his medbag, then back at the girl. Her hand dropped as if she had given up. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths, her face streaked with ash and tears. Jacob took one step forward, then another, ignoring the shouts of a nearby sergeant medic. "What are you doing? Get back here. Leave it. She is not our problem." But Jacob was already kneeling beside her, his hands moving with years of trained habit, checking her pulse, cleaning the blood from her face, opening her mouth to make sure her airway was clear. She flinched when he touched her, but she did not resist. Her eyes stayed locked on Hisayu. "Are going to be okay," Jacob said, even though he was not sure if it was true. She had several fractures, internal bleeding, and a deep plasma burn along her ribs. This kind of injury would kill most without treatment, but there was still time, maybe just enough. He pulled out a pain stim and injected it into her arm. She gasped, her back arching slightly as the medication began to work slowly. Her breathing evened out. Her fingers curled around his wrist, weakly holding on, like she feared he might vanish. "My name is Kira," she whispered. Jacob nodded, not asking for more information. She was a soldier, maybe a civilian, maybe a spy. It did not matter right now. What mattered was that she was alive and no one else was helping her. He slid his arms under her body, ignoring the sharp pain in his shoulder from a shrapnel wound earlier, and lifted her off the ground. She was lighter than he expected, but every step back toward the human side felt heavier than the last. Soldiers stared as he passed. Some shouted, some cursed, one even reached for his sidearm, until an officer barked a warning and pulled him back. Jacob did not speak. He kept walking straight to the field tent, pushing past the guards and laying Kira down on a medical slab. He started hooking her up to machines, setting broken bones, sealing wounds, cleaning cuts. She winced, but said nothing, just watched him with wide, tired eyes. Hours passed, and Jacob never left her side, even when his superior stormed in, demanding answers, even when a tribunal was threatened, even when another injured Marine had to wait because he was using the last of the advanced healing gel on her. No one could understand why he was doing this, not even Jacob really. He just knew that in that moment when she looked at him and reached out, he saw someone who needed help. Not an enemy, not a threat, just someone who would die alone if he did nothing. As the night fell, the field quieted. Only the hum of machines and distant thunder filled the air. Jacob sat beside her, arms crossed, leaning back in his chair, watching her chest rise and fall in slow, calm rhythm. She was stable for now, but questions raced in his mind. What had she been doing so close to human minds? Why was she alone? What had happened to her unit or her family? Then Kira opened her eyes again. Barely above a whisper, she spoke. "Thank you." Jacob looked over, surprised she was awake. He smiled tiredly. "You are welcome," he said gently. "I could not leave you there." She blinked slowly, as if trying to understand something deeper in his words. Then she asked, "Why would a human help someone like me?" Jacob paused, staring at the ceiling for a moment before replying, "Because someone had to, and I was the only one who stopped the medic who broke the rules." Jacob knew what he was doing was dangerous, but something deep inside him refused to let go of the alien girl, who now slept in the corner of the human medical tent. Her breathing was shallow but stable, the machines around her blinking with soft light as they monitored her condition. He had cleared the infection in her wounds, set her leg in a splint, and kept her body temperature regulated even when the other medics gave him cold stares and walked away in silence. He stayed focused on her, healing the girl, who said her name was Kira. Commanders had already sent 2 warnings demanding a full report on why he had wasted high-value resources on an enemy soldier. Jacob ignored them both instead. He locked the tent door from inside and told everyone he was dealing with a contagious case. No one wanted to get involved when infection was mentioned. It bought him time, but not much. The war outside had slowed into a cold standoff, neither side willing to make the next move. Both armies had suffered enough in the last clash, and now whispers of a ceasefire began to spread like smoke in the wind. But Jacob had no faith in rumors. He had seen too many peace talks collapse in seconds. Too many diplomats smile while soldiers bled. Kira stirred that night and called his name in a weak voice. Jacob moved closer, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. She opened her eyes, confusion and fear still swimming in them. Am I dead? She asked barely. Louder than a breath, Jacob smiled and shook his head. No, you are safe now. You are with me. She blinked slowly, taking in the strange sight of a human medic beside her. Her fingers touched her side, feeling the soft bandages and the edge of a healing wound. You saved me, Wybkaus. I could, Jacob replied, because no one else would. Her eyes filled with something heavy, something that spoke of loss and pain far beyond the battlefield. I thought your people hated us, she whispered. Jacob looked away, thinking about the faces he had seen twisted by grief and anger after every Valari attack, thinking about the propaganda that flooded every screen telling them the enemy was cruel, heartless, soulless monsters. Don't hate you, he said at last. I hate what the war made us become. She stared at him silently, then reached up and touched the side of his face, her hand trembling slightly. You are different. Later that night, while Kira slept, Jacob sat at his console recording a false medical report. He changed her species tag to unknown, adjusted her vitals to human ranges, and labeled the case as a deep trauma rescue on an unidentified civilian. The lies made his stomach twist, but the truth would have her dragged out of the tent and shot within the hour. Glanced at her as she lay under the blanket, small and fragile, yet something in her presence made the tent feel warmer, more alive. He had seen countless wounded soldiers, both human and alien, but never had he stayed this long beside one. Never had he cared so deeply for the fate of a stranger. In the morning, a high-ranking officer stormed into the tent demanding to see the unauthorized patient. Jacob met him at the entrance, cold steel in his voice and eyes. This is my patient under quarantine orders, and unless you want to risk exposure to neural rot, you will leave now. The officer froze. The mention of neural rot, a disease that melted the brain in days, made even the boldest retreat. He cursed under his breath and backed away. You have 48 hours, Jacob. Then this goes to tribunal. Job nodded calmly, knowing the clock was ticking. He turned back to Kira, who was now sitting up, slowly leaning against the metal wall. Her skin looked brighter, her eyes clearer, but her hands trembled as she drank from the water pouch. You could get killed for this, she said. Jacob sat beside her and nodded. I know, and still you helped me. Why? Looked at her, not as an alien, not as a threat, but as someone who reminded him of his sister, someone who had once needed help and was ignored, someone who had died alone because no one dared to go against orders. I lost someone once because I followed rules. I will not do that again. Kira stared at him with something that looked like awe in her eyes. No one from my side would have done this for you, she said quietly. Our healers are trained to ignore enemies, to let them die. Jacob sighed. Maybe that is why this war never ends, because both sides are too scared to show mercy. Outside, the sky rumbled with distant thunder and the sound of machines moving across muddy fields. Kira tried to stand, but cried out as her leg failed. Jacob caught her before she fell, lifting her gently and guiding her back to the bed. You need time, he said. Stay here, rest. Grabbed his arm before he pulled away, her eyes sharp now with something urgent. You should know something about me, she said, her voice trembling. I am not just a soldier. I am the daughter of someone important, someone they think is dead. Jacob leaned in, confused. What do you mean? Her voice dropped lower, barely a whisper. My father was the peace ambassador who vanished 2 years ago. He found out secrets about both governments and he tried to stop the war. They silenced him. I escaped, but I was hunted. I have something they want, something they will kill for. Jacob stared at her, heart pounding in his chest. What do you have? Ish looked up, fear in her voice, the truth, secrets beneath her skin. Night air inside the tent felt colder than before, and Jacob felt a deep weight pressing against his chest. As he stared into Kira's trembling eyes, she had spoken words that refused to leave his mind, words that echoed louder than the machines around them. My father was the peace ambassador, and they silenced him, and I escaped with the truth. Jacob leaned back in his chair, his hands resting against his face. He had treated battlefield injuries, burns, broken bones, loss of blood, but this was something else. This was not just about saving a life, this was about saving everything. Kira shifted in her bed, gripping the edge of the blanket, her voice barely above a whisper. They think I am dead too, and if they find out I am here, they will kill us both. Jacob stood slowly, not with fear, but with something else, something sharp like purpose. Tell me everything, he said. Tell me what you have, what they want. She reached for the side of her uniform and pulled out a small chip embedded under the skin near her ribcage. Her fingers were shaking as she pressed on the side of it, and it flickered with dim red light. This holds recordings, messages, intercepted orders, logs. From meetings between top Valari leaders and human war brokers, they planned this war together, Jacob. They are not enemies, they are partners in profit. They fuel hatred to keep the machines running, to keep factories building weapons, to keep soldiers dying. Jacob stared at the chip as if it were a bomb, and maybe it was. He had suspected corruption. He had heard whispers of peace talks shut down, but this was treason on both sides. This was genocide for money. He reached out slowly, taking the chip in his hand, feeling how warm it was, like it carried fire inside it. You have to get this to someone who can stop it, she said, someone who still believes in peace. Jacob looked at her, and in that moment he knew he had already made his choice. They could not stay in the tent. Someone would come, someone would find them. He grabbed his med pack, shoved the essentials inside, and helped Kira up, supporting her with one arm as she leaned into him. Her body still weak, but her will unbroken. Where will we go, she asked, not sure how far her injured leg would carry her. To the jungle zone, Jacob answered. The ruins out there have old signal towers. Maybe one still works. Maybe we can send this out to someone beyond the borders, someone who cannot be silenced. He moved fast, silent, through the outer paths of the camp, using emergency tunnels meant for wounded evacuations, carrying Kira through dark corridors filled with leaking pipes and dripping wires. Every noise made his heart race, but no one stopped them, not yet. And outside the perimeter, the cold air of the night hit them like ice, and the jungle loomed ahead, wild and full of life and death. Twisted trees reached out like claws, and the sound of distant creatures filled the darkness. But Jacob did not hesitate. He tightened the strap of his pack, adjusted Kira against his shoulder, and stepped into the wild without looking back. They walked for hours, sometimes resting under thick leaves, sometimes hiding when search drones passed overhead. Kira tried to help, but every few steps her leg would buckle, and Jacob would catch her, lifting her as if she weighed nothing, always whispering, keep going. We are almost there. Though neither knew how far there truly was. At sunrise they reached a broken tower made of rusted steel, half swallowed by vines and moss. It stood like a fallen god among the trees. Jacob found the control panel shattered and dark, but he worked fast, pulling wires, connecting his handheld scanner, redirecting energy through cracked circuits, while Kira sat beside him, clutching her side, trying not to cry out in pain. Can do this, he said softly, his fingers dancing across the keypad. But the device sparked and hissed, refusing to wake up. The tower was dead too. Old to broken. No, he whispered, shaking the console. And that was when Kira reached into her pocket and pulled out a small blue crystal. It glowed faintly, pulsing with strange rhythm. This is Valari tech, she said, ancient deep code. You can start old machines with it if you know how. Jacob took the crystal, unsure what it would do, but trusting her, he slid it into the slot, and the tower lights flickered, then flared to life. Screens blinked on, static hissed from the speakers, and Jacob saw signal strength rise just enough for a broadcast. Uploaded the data from the chip, encrypted it, routed it through civilian channels, bounced it off weather satellites, then hit send. The files vanished into the stream, racing through stars, heading for outposts, neutral zones, independent councils, anyone who might listen, anyone who might care. They both sat in silence for a long moment, the tower humming behind them, the jungle breathing around them. Jacob looked at Kira and saw tears in her eyes. Did it work, she asked, her voice hollow and scoretti. Do not know, he replied, but someone out there just got the truth, and maybe, just maybe, they will do what we can. It suddenly, the tower blared a warning signal. Movement detected. Hostile units approaching. They had been tracked. Someone had followed them, and they were closing in fast. Jacob stood, grabbing his rifle and helping Kira to her feet. We run now, he said. We hide, we survive, because this is only the beginning. Enemies close, and the jungle was alive with whispers as Jacob and Kira moved through the thick vines and twisted trees, the ancient leaves brushing against their faces, the ground wet and soft beneath their boots. Behind them, the alarm from the tower still echoed through the trees, and they knew the enemy would not be far now. Jacob tightened his grip on his rifle, his eyes scanning the shadows. Every movement, every crack of a branch made his pulse spike. Kira leaned against him, limping, struggling, her face pale from the pain, but her eyes fierce with willpower. She would not give up, not now, not after they had come so far. They reached a narrow stream, hidden beneath a canopy of moss and low-hanging branches. Jacob led Kira into the water, hoping the current would hide their trail. The cold bit at their skin, but they pushed forward, deeper into the unknown, guided only by instinct and desperation. Above them, drones buzzed, their red lights sweeping across the canopy, but the jungle was too thick for a clean scan, at least for now. Need shelter, Jacob whispered, his voice rough from the smoke and fear. Somewhere to hide and regroup. Kira nodded, her breath shallow. I know a place, she said, a voice from memory, from before all this, before the betrayal and the war and the lies. Her people had once studied this jungle long ago, mapping ruins built by forgotten species places. No one remembered now except her. There is an old temple north of here, she said. It was used for field research. It might still have power if we are lucky. Jacob did not question. He followed her instructions, moving faster now, carrying her when the ground grew steep, or the pain grew too much. They moved like shadows between the trees, and at last, just as the sun began to fade, they saw it rising from the vines and roots like a sleeping beast. Was a massive stone structure covered in carvings and moss, its doors half open, as if waiting for them inside. The air was cooler, the light dim, but safe. They found a chamber in the center where old machines lined the walls, long dead but intact. Jacob laid Kira down on a padded bench and collapsed beside her, his muscles screaming from the effort, his lungs burning from the run. For a moment neither of them spoke. They simply breathed, alive together in the silence. Then Kira sat up, her face hard. "We are not safe," she said. "They will keep looking until they find us, and when they do, they will not ask questions." Jacob nodded. "I know, but we have time now, time to plan, time to think, maybe time to finish what we started." He moved to the old terminal in the corner, brushing away dust and vines. The screen blinked as he pressed the side panel, and to his surprise it lit up weakly, responding to the same Valari crystal from before. He tapped into its system, rerouting its sensors, scanning the area for threats. And what he saw made his stomach turn. 3 heat signatures moving fast through the trees. Heavily armed, likely elite hunters, not regular soldiers. "They are close," he said. "Very close." Kira sat up straighter, her hands trembling. "If they capture us, they will erase everything, not just the message, but us too, and the truth dies with us." Jacob looked at her for a long time, and then his voice dropped low and steady. "Then we do not get captured, we fight, we finish this, and we disappear." Kira touched the side of her arm, tracing a thin scar beneath the skin. She pulled something from under the bench, a small device shaped like a spiral. "This is a memory beacon," she said. "If you die, I will send it with your story. If I die, you do the same. It is a pact." Jacob took the device, holding it for a moment, then nodding. "We both live," he said. "Not as hope, but as promise." He set traps near the entrance, using old tech and medical equipment, sharp wires, repurposed stimulants, and makeshift flash bombs. Kira loaded what was left of her sidearm, her fingers shaking, but her aim true. Then came the sound, boots against stone, voices in a language Jacob did not recognize. But Kira did. Her eyes flared wide. "Those are not soldiers," she said. "Those are cleansers. They are sent to destroy evidence, not take prisoners." Jacob gritted his teeth, his body tensed. The traps would not hold them for long, maybe a few seconds at best. Enough to distract, maybe enough to escape. As the first figure entered the chamber, a wire snapped. A burst of light exploded, blinding white. The hunter screamed and stumbled back, and Jacob fired, hitting the second square in the chest. The third rushed forward, but Kira fired to her shot, slicing through armor. They moved together like dancers bound by danger and trust, fighting not just for survival, but for something larger, something real. When the last hunter fell, the silence returned, broken only by the ragged breathing. The traps were destroyed, and Jacob was bleeding from a deep cut along his side. But they were alive. Kira crawled to his side, wrapping her arms around him. "You saved me again," she whispered. He looked at her, his voice low. "You saved me too." "We are not done yet." Kira nodded, her voice firm. "Then we run again, because they will send more. And next time it will not be just 3. Jacob helped her up, and together they stepped into the dark temple hall, searching for another way out, not knowing where it would lead, only knowing they would face it side by side. The memory of fire and Mursad jungle swallowed them again as they left the ruined temple behind, moving slowly through the underbrush with only moonlight to guide them. Jacob leaned heavily on a branch-turned walking stick while Kira limped beside him, her arm wrapped tightly around his waist. Their clothes were torn, their faces streaked with sweat and dirt, but they were alive, and the dead had been sent now. They just had to stay ahead of the fire that followed. They found a small cave near a stream, hidden behind a curtain of vines, and there they collapsed. Jacob carefully removed the dressing from his side. Blood soaked through the bandage, and the wound looked angry, raw, and deep. Kira winced at the sight, her hands trembling as she reached for the medkit. "Let me help," she said softly. Jacob nodded, too tired to argue, and she began cleaning the cut, her touch careful though untrained. She pressed a cloth to the wound. As he bit down on a strip of fabric, his jaw tight, his eyes clouded. When the pain eased enough for him to breathe, he looked up at her and saw tears on her face. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, but her voice cracked. "I never thought I would care if a human lived or died, and now I cannot bear the thought of losing you." Jacob reached up, his fingers brushing against her cheek. "You will not lose me, not yet." They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the jungle whisper around them. And then Jacob began to speak, not about war or duty or pain, but about the past. He told her of his home, a small colony on the edge of human space, lush green Hills and a sky filled with twin suns. He told her of the day the Valari ships came not with weapons, but with cold silent machines that hovered over the fields draining energy. And seizing control, he told her how his sister, just 13, had tried to hide their family photos from the invaders and how a soldier had struck her down. Without warning, Kira listened, her hands covering her mouth, tears rolling down her cheeks. I did not know, she said. I thought the humans started the war. I thought we were defending ourselves. Jacob looked at her, his eyes hollow. That is what we were told to. Maybe we both were lied to. Maybe they wanted us to hate each other, so we would never see the truth. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small item. It looked like a coin with symbols engraved on one side and a clear lens on the other. This was my father's, she said, his personal memory disk. I have never dared open it, but I think it is time. Jacob nodded slowly, and she pressed her thumb against the lens. Light burst from the disk, casting a hologram into the cave. A tall Valari man appeared, his eyes tired but kind, his voice soft and heavy with sorrow. If you are seeing this, then I have failed, he said, and the war still burns. I tried to speak to both sides to show them that we could live together, but greed is a language louder than peace. I have hidden the final proof of their agreement deep within the neutral zone. If you can find it, you can end this, not with weapons but with truth. I love you, Kira. Do not let hate win. The image faded and the cave went dark again. Kira sat frozen, her hands clenched around the disc. I will find it, she whispered. I will finish what he started. Jacob placed a hand on hers, and we will do it together. Morning. Jacob was weaker, fever creeping through his body. The wound infected. Despite their efforts, Kira refused to leave him. Instead, she built a signal flare from old beacon parts and activated it, sending a coded message into the sky, hoping anyone with a heart would hear it and come. Hours passed, and Jacob drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling names and places from long ago. Kira sat beside him, holding his hand, speaking softly, telling him stories of her childhood, of the glowing fields of valor, of music that sounded like wind and fire. Together, she told him he was brave, not just for saving her, but for believing in something better than revenge. And then the sound came, a low hum that grew louder, a ship descending above the trees, not military, but civilian, painted in peacekeeper colors, a miracle in metal. Kira stood waving her arms, tears streaming down her face as the ship landed, and medics poured out, one of them rushing to Jacob, checking his pulse, stabilizing his vital. She's alive, they said, but just barely. We need to move now. Kira climbed aboard the ship, never letting go of his hand, never looking back at the jungle that had tried to swallow them whole. Jacob lay still, breathing faint but steady, and Kira whispered into his ear, we are not done yet. You promised we both live. With message that changed everything. The ship soared above the jungle, moving fast across the sky, while Jacob lay on the medical table, pale and still, his chest rising in slow, uneven rhythm. The medics worked in silence, tubes and wires running from machines to his body, his pulse flickering across the monitors. Kira sat beside him, her hand wrapped tightly around his, her eyes never blinking, her mind filled with the sound of her father's voice and the image of truth buried in the neutral zone. The peacekeeper vessel was old but well maintained, and the crew seemed surprised by the sight of a human and a Valari together, not fighting, not yelling, not broken, but bonded by something deeper, something no one understood yet. The captain, a grizzled woman named Mira, asked no questions. She simply looked at Kira and nodded understanding in her tired eyes. We will get him to the sanctuary, she said. We have better equipment there, and if the data you sent is what you say, then we have much to do. Kira handed her the memory disk, the one with her father's message and the hidden proof. The captain slid it into the console, and a wave of silence followed as the screen lit up with encrypted files, secret logs, and visual records, transmissions from human and Valari leaders planning the war behind closed doors, laughing about profit, measuring lives and numbers. And Resource Myra clenched her fists and stepped back from the screen, her voice low and filled with fury. They betrayed all of us, not just soldiers, not just civilians, but everything we believed in. The crew worked through the night, preparing the files for transmission to the Galactic Council, a body long, thought powerless but still holding symbolic weight across the stars. Kira watched from Jacob's side, whispering to him, telling him the truth was finally rising, that he had made it happen, even if he could not hear her, even if his breath was growing slower with each hour. At dawn, the ship reached the sanctuary, a floating station hidden in the atmosphere of a gas giant built by exiles and survivors, a place untouched by war and free from control. Kira helped the medics unload Jacob, guiding his bed through the metal halls as people stared, some in fear, some in awe. The sight of a Valari girl holding a human's hand burned into their minds like fire. They placed Jacob in a chamber of healing, a room filled with soft light and energy fields that hummed with life. The doctors promised nothing but worked with urgency, determined to save him, if only for what he had done. Meanwhile, Kira and Mira stood before the council of the sanctuary leaders, a mix of species bound by shared pain and hope. The files were played in silence, the truth laid bare in every word. Every image, every order given by those who called themselves leaders. The room erupted not in chaos, but in sorrow, voices cracking with disbelief and rage. How many had died for this lie? How many planets burned? How many children lost because peace had no profit? We must send this to every channel, every outpost, every corner of space, said Mira, her voice sharp like steel. They cannot cover this up. They cannot silence us. Alt Council agreed, and within hours, the message began to spread through the stars, flowing across systems, into screens and speakers, into homes and bases, into minds tired of hate and hungry for truth. Reactions came like firestorms. Protests erupted. Leaders were questioned, arrested. Some tried to deny, but the evidence was too strong, too real to erase. The war began to crumble, not with missiles, but with knowledge and the will to say no more. Akira stood in the healing room beside Jacob, watching the glow of the machines. As his heartbeat grew stronger, steadier, his fingers twitched once, then again, and her breath caught in her throat. Jacob, she whispered, can you hear me? His eyes opened slowly, blinking against the light, and his lips moved without sound. She leaned close, and he whispered, barely louder than a breath, did we do? Each smiled, tears falling. Yes, we did, and now they know, now they all know. Reached for her hand, and she took it, pressing her forehead to his, and for the first time since the war began, they both felt something neither had dared to hope. Peace, not the kind spoken by liars or signed in secret rooms, but something real, something earned by courage and sacrifice. Jacob rested again, his body healing slowly, while Kira walked the halls of the sanctuary, speaking to others, sharing her father's message, her own story, her bond with the human who chose compassion over command. Everywhere she went, eyes followed, not with suspicion, but with wonder. The war that had seemed endless was ending, not with one side winning, but with everyone waking up, and that awakening had begun with a single act of mercy on a battlefield long forgotten by those who started it. Girl, they all ignored. The Galactic Council chamber was filled with silence, a silence so deep it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. Every seat was taken. Beings from every corner of the galaxy watched the center platform, where a single figure stood, her silver skin glowing softly under the lights, her voice clear but shaking, her hands folded over her chest. She was not a leader, not a general, not a warrior. She was just a girl, a girl they all had ignored, a girl who was supposed to die in the dirt. But she did not die because one human refused to walk away. Kira looked up, her eyes locking with the council. She had waited weeks for this moment, and now it had come, not with fanfare, not with victory music, but with a weight so heavy her chest felt like it might collapse. Jacob sat behind her, still healing, but stronger now. His eyes never left her. His presence alone gave her the strength to speak. He was left to die on a battlefield, she said, voice rising. Only one person helped me. He was a human, a medic, who broke every rule, every order to save the life of someone he had every reason to had a fear. Were murmurs in the room, not loud, just soft enough to reveal guilt, confusion, fear. She continued, her voice steadier now. I carry the memories of my father, a peace ambassador, who tried to stop this war, who was silenced by the very leaders you trusted. I carry the truth that this war was never meant to end, that it was built to feed power and wealth, while we bled, while our families were destroyed, while our children were taught to. Hatesh paused, holding up the memory disc, the same one her father gave his life to protect. This holds the truth, and you have all seen it, every message, every betrayal, every order that kept us blind. But now we are no longer blind, and we will not return to silence. The council leader, a tall being with emerald skin and eyes like black stars, leaned forward and asked quietly, what do you want from us? Kira looked back at Jacob, then returned her gaze to the crowd. I want you to remember what mercy looks like. It looks like a human medic kneeling beside an enemy girl with no reason to help and every reason to walk away, but he stayed. And because he stayed, everything changed. There was no applause, no cheers, only quiet nods, only the soft sound of hearts opening, of walls beginning to fall. And when she stepped down from the platform, Jacob stood to meet her, his step slow but strong, his hand reaching for hers. And together they walked out of the chamber, through halls filled with whispers and stares, not of hatred, but of hope. The news spread faster than light. The girl saved by a human, the truth revealed by two who should have been enemies. Children listened and asked questions. Leaders hesitated before giving orders. Soldiers looked across battlefields and saw faces, not targets. Ceasefires were declared. Fleets pulled back. Meetings were arranged, not in secret bunkers, but in open halls, where voices could be heard. And when Jacob was asked to speak, he simply said, I was never a hero. I was just someone who saw a person bleeding and could not walk. Awei and Kira became symbols not of peace forged by treaties, but of something deeper, peace. Born from choice, from pain, from courage, they traveled to wounded planets, to orphan stations, to burned-out colonies, and everywhere they went people listened, not because they had power, but because they had truth on night. As the stars shone through the sanctuary dome, Kira sat beside Jacob, watching the sky, her head resting on his shoulder, her voice soft. "Do you think it will last?" Jacob looked at the stars, then at her. "I think it will if people like you keep speaking. If people like us keep walking into fire and choosing not to burn others." Smiled, her fingers twining with his. "Then let us keep walking together." And so they did. They walked through worlds, still healing, through crowds, still learning, through storms, still clearing. They walked side by side, never forgetting that everything changed, not with a weapon, not with a vote, but with a simple act of mercy when one human chose to kneel beside one girl who everyone else had left behind. The day mercy rewrote the stars, stood beneath the wide open sky, the world no longer filled with smoke and fire, but with voices rising across the stars, voices that once shouted in rage now whispered, of healing now spoke, of a different kind of strength, the strength found in mercy, the strength found in truth, and the strength found in one human who dared to stop. When all others walked by, Jacob held her hand as they walked across the field where the war had once begun, where soldiers once fell, where machines once roared, now flowers had returned blooming from soil once soaked with pain and blood. Kira looked down at the earth, and then up into the sky, her breath catching as the suns rose, together casting gold across everything. "We never thought this day would come," she said, her voice soft like wind. "We never thought peace would find us." Jacob smiled, not with pride, but with quiet knowing. "We did not find peace," he said. "We built it with broken hands and torn hearts." They passed a group of children playing near the old wrecks, laughing, voices rising as they ran through the field. None of them wore uniforms, none of them held fear in their eyes, and none of them knew the name of the man who sent the final order to destroy. None of them remembered the name of the general who sold their futures for fire and ash, but all of them knew the story of the medic who stayed when he should have run, and the alien girl who carried the memory of her father through the shadows, until the truth reached the light at the sanctuary station above orbit. A statue stood now, not carved from gold or stone, but from salvaged ship metal from both human and Valari wrecks. It showed a human figure kneeling beside another, a girl wounded but rising, her hand reaching toward the sky, and beneath it a single phrase written in every language that echoed across the galaxy: "Mercy is greater than war." Kira stood before it with Jacob beside her, his arm around her shoulders as diplomats passed by, soldiers bowed, and children placed flowers at the base of the monument. They did not speak. They simply watched the light dance across the metal like stars, and memories woven together, years passed, and the story spread, not as legend, not as myth, but as truth carved into the soul of a galaxy that had forgotten how to feel. And on one quiet night in a home they built together, far from the fields of battle, far from the machines of war, Jacob sat by the window, looking out at the sky while Kira rested beside him, her head on his chest, her fingers tracing the scars that once marked his pain. "Do you regret it?" she asked, not moving, just breathing. Shook his head slowly. "No, because that day when I knelt in the dust and saw you broken and bleeding, I did not see an enemy. I saw someone who needed me. And in saving you, I found something I never thought I would again. I found myself." She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "And I found you outside." The stars kept burning, ancient, silent, watching, and for the first time in generations, they reflected not a galaxy divided, but one healing, one remembering that peace begins not with armies or treaties, but with a single heart choosing compassion over command. And that choice, that moment, changed everything forever. The end.